This was painted by Vincent van Gogh in 1887 when he was living with his brother Theo together in Paris. It is in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and it's called the courtisane. That's a Japanese lady. In those days, in 1887, when Vincent was in Paris, he was really into Japanese art. And he was not the only one. Many artists and many painters were fascinated by everything that came from Japan. Reason for that was a World Expo. The World Exposition in Paris was in 1867. And before that, until 1860, Japan was a closed country. It had no contact with the Western world, but in 1860 it was like a North Korea. But then in 1860, Japan opened up. And at these World Expositions, they showed the world their architecture and their fashion and their culture. And Japan was really interested in the modern Western world, and the Western world was really fascinated by the traditional Japanese culture, its fashion and its art. Nowadays we have internet and we have a television, so we can see what's going on in the world and what's new there and what kind of trends are interesting. But in those days we needed the World Expositions for that, and the painters and the artists here in the West, they couldn't believe their eyes. Everything was so new and it was so different from what was common in the Western world. The Western painters, they couldn't believe their eyes. Everything was so new, and especially the Impressionists, they loved the Japanese prints. With big colored areas outlined, no shadows, flat, diagonals, and great attention for details and for nature, bright colors and bright sunlight. And it was the opposite of what was common in the West. Typical for Japanese art was the attention for nature, sometimes in close-up, and Vincent often applied that as well. You can see that here with the butterfly. Sometimes objects like a tree are suddenly cut off by the frame of the painting, so we only see part of the tree. That was typical Japanese art as well. And often also the point of view sometimes was different. Often an object painted from a bird's eye view. And typical for Japanese prints was the diagonal that runs through the whole print. In Vincent's work you often see that as well. And sometimes you could see the combination, the nature detailed in close-up and the diagonal. In Paris, he copied 2 Japanese wood carvings to practice his Japanese style, to get familiar with the technique. Here you see them. On the left-hand side is the original wood carving, and then on the right-hand side is Vincent's copy in paint. But they are in the Vincent van Gogh Museum as well in Amsterdam. But he also copied the front cover of a magazine. This was a popular magazine in Paris in those days. It was called Paris Illustré, and they published a certain moment a Japanese edition because Japan was hot, of course. And on the cover was this Japanese lady, but Vincent could tell by her clothes that this was a Japanese courtesan, and a courtesan is more or less a prostitute for the nobility, for the elite. It's not always a sex worker though, but definitely a lady focused on entertainment in the higher classes. And he could tell this because of the way she was wearing her belt. She wear it on the front side of her body, and all those things she has in her hair. So Vincent thought on his painting that it would be funny to add some symbolism to the painting. So he had some space left anyway on the canvas, and he added all the bamboo, and he added some frogs and crane birds. Vincent already spent some time in Paris, and he apparently picked up some street language, because a frog in the French language was a sort of a nickname for a prostitute, and a pond, a pool with frogs in it, was slang for a brothel. And also the crane bird, that stands for a lady with a bad reputation. So it's definitely not the French that they would teach you at school. But all these frogs and the crane birds that he added, he copied them from Japanese prints that he collected. Here you can see the original ones. In 1887, his collection of Japanese prints was that big that he even held an exposition at the bar around the corner called the Tambourine. Here on the background of this painting, it's a painting, this lady, she was the owner, Agostina Segatori. You can actually see Vincent's Japanese collection at the background. And also on another portrait that Vincent made. This is Père Tanguy. That's the owner of the shop where Vincent bought his paint and his pencils, and then sent the bill to Theo, of course. But also on the background of this painting you can see some Japanese prints. And on this one you can even see the painting that we are discussing now. Also other painters, impressionists like Émile Bernard and Gauguin, they were influenced by the Japanese art. And these guys lived and they worked together for a while in Brittany, in Pont-Aven. And due to what they saw in Japanese prints, their style was just very simple shapes with bold and flat forms separated by dark contours. A style that we call cloisonnism. A cloison, that's French for a compartment. And in this style they reduce everything to areas of single colors and separated by heavy black outlines. Very flat, no perspective, very Japanese. So eventually you can see that these compartments, you can see them also in Vincent's work. Good example is the painting with the fishing boats, but also the painting of his bedroom. So Vincent observed Japanese, everything that he saw, a landscape, a garden, or fishing boats, or even his own bedroom. He compared that with the Japanese prints from his own collection. So the Japanese art had a huge influence on Vincent's work. He collected the Japanese prints, he copied them, but most important is that he modernized his own style a few times based on what he saw in these prints. And nowadays, worldwide seen as his masterpieces, are his paintings in which you can recognize these flat, single colored areas. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this video and hope to see you with one of my other videos. Bye!